Hi, this is Ben Sordo. In this documentary, you're going to see what the farming life is like for both John and Bonnie Hall at Maple Breeze Farm. On one of my first trips to Maple Breeze Farm, I set out to capture the animals. I soon realized that capturing them in motion was going to be more difficult than I thought, and that's when I decided to switch to video for most of the documentary. Back in 2017, John and Bonnie got the necessary tools and parts to make the sugar shack that they now have and use on a regular basis. While going to Maple Breeze Farm, I enjoyed working together with both John and Bonnie Hall. More recently, John showed me some pictures of his family and cherished them very much. Bonnie had a special connection with a baby lamb named Lyle on the farm. The same day, Bonnie invited her friend over to see what it was like to take care of a small animal that no longer had its mother. I've asked John Hall for an interview about Maple Breeze Farm, and he's agreed to talk about what's important and what the history is that goes on throughout the years.
So my name is John Hall. You're at Maple Breeze Farm here in Westford, Connecticut. My family's been farming here since 1635. Today we're sitting in our sugar house and we're starting to make maple syrup, the first batch of the season this year.
You're making maple syrup.
So we're making maple syrup. This year we're about a week earlier than we were last year when I look back at our records. So maple syrup is very highly dependent on the weather. And to make maple syrup, you have to have winter. Winter will freeze the ground. Everything is cold and should remain cold for a while. What you think of as traditional New England winters. And then once we get days where the temperature warms up at 40 or so, and the sap will start to run slowly up the tree, that's when you need to tap the trees. And you need to be ready and set for that, because if you miss the sap, there's no going back. It only happens for a relatively short time in the spring when you have those days after winter, when you have temperatures in the 40s and 50s and freezing at night. And what happens is sap moves up through the roots and into the tree trunks, picks up the sugars from the wood. When it freezes, then it runs again, and you put a little tap hole in the tree, and the sap drips out and you collect it. So you collect the sap, and then we bring it here to the sugar house and do what we call evaporate it. So you're basically boiling it down, and usually a ratio of anywhere from 40 or 50 gallons to 1 gallon of finished product of syrup. So here in our sugar house, we have what's called an evaporator. The evaporator is a wood-fired, basically machine, big boiling pan really, with stainless steel pans with a wood fire underneath. And what it does is it boils the sap to get the water out of it and condense it down to the finished product of maple syrup. So we have outside the sugar house about 1,200 gallons of sap that we've collected this week. This is our first day of boiling this season, and the sap is fed in by gravity from outside. There's a small little compartment on the side of the evaporator that has a float in it. It works similar to a float in a common toilet to keep the sap at the right level. It comes in cold at the ambient outside temperature, which is probably somewhere around 33 or 34 degrees of the sap today. It goes into a warming tray in the far end of the evaporator. Warms it up with the sap that's boiling on the other side of that tray, flows out into what we call the sap pan. And the sap pan is what's termed a raised flue pan. And our evaporator is a 3 by 12 foot. So our sap pan is 3 by 8 feet long, and it's got raised flues in it. So what happens is the fire and the smoke from the fire is forced up into these flues, so you have a large surface area for heat transfer to take place. So we boil the water rapidly in there, and if you look and see it in the film, it's boiling very aggressively in there, and the bubbling up a good 6 to 8 inches there because it's so hot. And then the smokestack at the far end of the evaporator is running at about 450 degrees exhaust temperature, so it gives you a feel for how hot it is inside the evaporator. And then that evaporates the sap somewhat, and then we draw it down into what's called the syrup pan. And the syrup pan is over the actual firebox of the evaporator where the wood fire is burning. And that's a flat pan, and that gets more and more concentrated. And as it gets into there, the temperature gets higher. And maple syrup is officially maple syrup at the temperature of 219 degrees Fahrenheit. So we boil it in there until it gets to be about 217, 218, and then I draw it off when it's not quite ready, and I put it over a propane fire in small quantities of 3 to 5, 6 gallons, something like that, and finish it and measure it with a hydrometer until it gets to the right specific gravity or viscosity at 219 degrees, and then we bottle it to become maple syrup. So, having said that, we'll talk about the wood fire for a minute. Under the evaporator, there's what's called the firebox, where we put seasoned firewood in, and it'll go through a wheelbarrow full of big split firewood about every 20 minutes. We can easily burn a quart a day in there when we're evaporating, because we're evaporating at the rate of about 60 gallons of water off the steam an hour with this machine. Um, so at a 50-to-1 ratio, we technically can make a little more than a gallon of maple syrup in an hour over the course of a day. So we have on the farm here American milking Devon cattle, commonly referred to as Devons. They've been here in Westbrook on our family farm since 1635 when our family settled here. They are a small cow that are a very easy keeper on the environment that we have here. They live on the feed that we have around here very well. They live in the woods around here very well. They have adopted to the climate here in New England very well, and we continue to keep them here for a number of those reasons, because they're efficient, small farm animals, and they're an important part of our farm income because we sell a lot of them for meat, as well as selling the offspring for other breeding herds and small steers to be trained up for oxen, things like that. But they're an important part here. They're the biggest thing. Biggest component of what we do at the farm is our meat sales, and the Devons make up a good part of that. So we sell them as hamburger and hot dogs and kielbasa and so on. So the Devon cattle were very widespread throughout the early colonies, and as America developed, they were widespread throughout the country to the point where there were thousands and thousands of them. And World War II came along and changed modern agriculture, and the Devons didn't fit into production agriculture at all. They give a small quantity of milk, so they weren't useful for modern dairy. They take a long time to grow to adequate size for beef, so they weren't favored in any feedlots. So they became nearly extinct in the mid-1970s, and an organization was formed to protect them, and another organization was formed to register all the known Devons. And at that point in the mid-1970s, they found less than 200 animals to start the registry. The registry has grown into what's now called the American Milking Devon Cattle Association, of which I am the current president in North America. And the cattle are only found now in North America and the U.S. and some in Canada. So the association works to promote and preserve the Devon, and to also record and register all of the purebred animals. So the Devon cattle in Plymouth Plantation came in there in 1623, and they became very prolific. They're a great family cow. They give a great quality milk, but the quantity is maybe anywhere from 2 to 5 gallons a day, depending on the animal. And they make a great, an excellent beef, very lean, but they're slow growing. It takes you a good 6 or 7 years to develop a full-sized animal to be like today would be a competitive carcass to cut the cuts that Americans are used to today. So they're slow growing, but they're triple purpose. And the third purpose was something we don't see much of today, was draft animals, and oxen in particular. And oxen are castrated males that are yoked together to provide power and do work. So oxen built early New England with the plowing in between the stumps in the fields, and drawing the stones for foundation stones, and building stones, and pulling logs and firewood. Oxen did that work early on, and particularly Devon oxen, because they're the smartest, most endurant oxen that you can get, fastest paced of any other breed. And oxen did that work. Horses, draft horses, came much later. They were more of a richer man's draft animal. Oxen were the everyday farmer's animal of choice for their power at their farms. Oxen, and Devons in particular, thrived in all of early New England and spread through New England and through actually down into the mid-Atlantic states in the South. And Mount Vernon, George Washington Plantation, he had Devon oxen, he had Devon cows, and today they have a small herd of Devons at Mount Vernon because that's historically accurate to what would have been there when Washington lived there. So, talking for a minute about how we feed our animals, our Devons are fed a diet of hay and grass. So, in the summer, they pasture in the fields and eat their own grass. But in the winter here in New England, there is no grass, so we have to put up bales and bales of hay and enough to support the animals throughout the whole fall, winter, and spring until there's adequate grass. So, that's quite a process. We cut probably, I'd say, 350 or to 400 acres of hay every summer off fields that we own and other fields that other folks own that we can use. Either we rent or use just to maintain the fields for folks that like to see them kept open. So we cut the grasses on the fields, you dry it, take the moisture out of it, and bale it up and store it in the barns, and that's called hay, and that's what we feed all winter. It's essentially dried grass. Although some of the newer technology, and we've expanded into this in the last couple of years, is we can bale some green forage grasses up into big round bales and wrap them in plastic. You've probably seen the round plastic look like overgrown marshmallows, and that's mostly greener grass preserved inside the plastic to feed the cattle during the winter season. Here on the farm, we not only have the Devon cattle, we have pigs and we have sheep and we have chickens and ducks and a few guinea hens. So the whole relationship between those animals, it's sort of synergistic. We have the cattle and the pigs. So the pigs drink some cow milk every day, which helps the pigs grow. We find it to make the flavor of the pork excellent. And then when we make our products, some of our products are blended. For instance, we have some hot dogs that are half beef and half pork. We also have sheep at the farm, which eat the same hay that our cows eat, so it's easy for us to feed them. We just have to generate a little more volume of the hay. And we have chickens, of course, and the chickens, lay eggs. We have chickens not for meat, but for eggs, and they're laying eggs. Right now, they're probably laying 50 to 60 eggs a day in the springtime here, and we sell those obviously by the dozen all spring and summer at the farmers market. So every animal that we have here contributes one way or the other into the farm income, and it slots in nicely with what we do. We're a really old-time family farm.